The scent of pine needles and damp earth was Elias Thorne's oldest companion, far more reliable than any human. It clung to his weathered clothing, permeated the very rough-hewn timbers of his small cabin, and filled his lungs with every slow, deliberate breath he took. This was the scent of home, deep within the ancient, misty embrace of the Great Smoky Mountains of Tennessee. His cabin, a structure of hand-hewn logs, stood nestled in a secluded hollow a few miles off the beaten path from the bustling tourist town of Gatlinburg. While Gatlinburg buzzed with neon lights, pancake houses, and eager tourists seeking manufactured thrills, Elias lived a life of quiet solitude, a rhythm dictated not by clocks, but by the rise and fall of the sun, the whispers of the wind through the pines, and the subtle shifts in the mountain's temperament. Elias was an old man, his face a roadmap of wrinkles etched by sun and wisdom, his hands gnarled like the ancient oak roots that clung to the mountainsides. A thick, grizzled beard, the color of winter snow, cascaded down his chest, often dusted with the sawdust from his latest carving project. His gait was slow, a deliberate shuffle that seemed to measure each step against the ancient pulse of the earth. To the hurried tourists, he was an anachronism, a relic of a bygone era, often mistaken for a local eccentric rather than a living repository of generations of mountain lore. They saw his deliberate pace as weakness, his quiet demeanor as oddity, and his traditional ways as quaint, if not outright foolish. Evenings in Elias's cabin were a ritual of handcrafted peace. Tonight, a soft amber glow from an oil lamp filled the single room, casting dancing shadows on the rough-plastered walls. The only sounds were the gentle hiss of a cast-iron kettle on the wood-burning stove and the rhythmic thwack-thwack-thwack of his carving knife against a block of fragrant cedar. He was meticulously working on a new walking stick, its contours slowly emerging from the raw wood, each stroke precise, deliberate, born of decades of intimate understanding of both the material and the purpose. He wasn't rushing. The wood would yield its secrets in its own time. His movements were the antithesis of modern haste, a testament to patience and respect for process. Afterward, he sat at his small, sturdy table, the remnants of a simple dinner of cornbread and vegetable stew cooling in a bowl before him. He ate slowly, savoring each mouthful, his gaze often drifting towards the single window that looked out onto the encroaching twilight. His eyes, the color of deep moss, held a distant, contemplative quality, as if he could see beyond the immediate forest, perceiving the subtle shifts in the wind, anticipating the coming weather by the way the leaves rustled, or predicting the next snowfall by the behavior of the migrating birds. He was a silent observer, constantly reading the intricate language of the wilderness, a tongue few others bothered to learn. This quiet solitude wasn't a burden for Elias, it was a profound connection, a communion with the natural world that fed his spirit. Yet, there was a subtle ache in his chest, a longing to share his wisdom, to pass on the deep, unspoken truths of the mountains to those who seemed increasingly deaf to their call. People mistook his simplicity for ignorance, his quietude for isolation. They didn't see the vast, intricate network of knowledge he held within him, accumulated over a lifetime of listening to the land. The people of Gatlinburg, particularly the younger generation entering the guiding trade, often viewed Elias as an outdated relic. His methods, based on instinct, observation, and inherited wisdom, were deemed inefficient compared to their GPS devices, satellite phones, and high-tech weather apps. They favored speed, technology, and curated experiences over genuine communion with nature. His profound understanding of the wilderness was dismissed as mere superstition, his careful pace as slowness, his respect for the mountain's power as an old man's timidity. They didn't understand that for Elias, the mountain wasn't just a challenge to be conquered. It was a living entity, a teacher, a force to be respected, listened to, and, sometimes, appeased. One crisp autumn morning, a rare sight unfolded near the entrance to one of the more popular hiking trails, a well-trodden path that wound its way up towards the lower slopes of Thunder Peak. A young buck, still clumsy with adolescent antlers, had somehow become entangled in a tangle of discarded fishing line near a small stream. Its frantic struggles only tightened the translucent snare around its leg, and its panicked bleats echoed through the quiet forest. A small group of hikers, brightly dressed in brand-new outdoor gear, had gathered, looking on with a mixture of pity and helplessness. They tried to approach, but the buck's terror made it thrash wildly, its sharp antlers a danger. No one seemed to know how to help without further injuring the animal or themselves. They pulled out their phones, debating whether to call park rangers, aware that help could be hours away. Elias, who had been on his usual morning walk, came upon the scene. He observed for a moment, his gaze calm, assessing the situation with a quiet intensity. Without a word, he set down his own walking stick. He approached the distressed animal not with hurried steps, but with a slow, deliberate cadence, his presence exuding a profound sense of peace. His movements were gentle, unthreatening. He knelt down, murmuring softly, his voice a low, soothing rumble that seemed to calm the buck's frantic struggles. His weathered hands, usually engaged in carving or knot tying, moved with surprising agility and precision. He didn't use force, but a patient, practiced touch. He carefully untangled the nearly invisible fishing line, strand by delicate strand, his fingers working with the meticulous patience of a spider spinning its web. It took time, long minutes that stretched into an eternity for the anxious hikers. But Elias did not rush. His focus was absolute, his connection to the struggling animal palpable. Finally, with a soft snip of a small blade he carried on his belt, the last strand gave way. The buck, free but still trembling, sprang up, hesitated for a moment, its wide eyes meeting Elias's calm gaze, then bounded into the underbrush, disappearing into the protective embrace of the forest. The hikers, who had watched in stunned silence, broke into murmurs of awe and quiet appreciation. One young woman, holding her phone aloft, had managed to capture the entire sequence, her gaze fixed on the old guide with newfound respect. This small, selfless act of compassion, performed with an innate understanding of the wild, was Elias's save the cat moment. It showcased his deep connection to nature, his profound kindness, and his quiet mastery, proving that true strength often lay not in speed or technology, but in patience and empathy. It instantly endeared him to any observer, making them root for the unassuming old man. Elias had a secret, a closely guarded treasure that he never spoke of, tucked away in a worn leather pouch that hung from his belt. It was an old, hand-drawn map, its supple deer hide darkened with age and countless hours of handling. This wasn't just any map. It was an ancestral relic, passed down through generations of his Cherokee forebears. It wasn't a conventional topographical chart, marked with contour lines and GPS coordinates. Instead, it was a living, breathing guide to the hidden heart of the Smoky Mountains. It depicted a labyrinthine network of forgotten animal trails, faint, almost invisible deer paths, secret shortcuts known only to a precious few, and ancient natural landmarks, peculiar rock formations, whispers of waterfalls, specific groves of trees that were invisible on any modern survey. The trails it showed were often referred to in hushed tones by his ancestors as the slow paths, passages that favored stealth and observation over speed. The map had been meticulously annotated over centuries, a collective memory etched onto hide. It contained symbols for safe passages during heavy rains, markers for hidden springs, and even specific patterns of moss growth that indicated stable ground. This map represented an intimate, profound knowledge of the mountain, a relationship honed over millennia. Elias had never boasted about it, never shown it to the brash young guides who mocked his outdated ways. It was a sacred trust, a silent testament to the wisdom of his ancestors, a wisdom that the modern world, with its reliance on algorithms and screens, had largely forgotten. This concealed detail, this ancient, living map, hinted at a deeper, almost mystical connection to the wilderness, a hidden talent that would, in time, prove invaluable. It subtly planted the seed of curiosity, creating an unspoken expectation for its eventual revelation. Elias's internal world was a complex tapestry of quiet reverence and simmering frustration. He yearned for the younger generation, the eager but often reckless hikers and guides, to understand the profound value of traditional knowledge, the deep symbiotic relationship between humanity and nature that his ancestors had perfected. He wanted them to appreciate the mountains not just as a playground for adventure sports, but as a living, breathing entity deserving of respect and careful stewardship. Yet, he was painfully accustomed to the dismissive glances, the knowing smirks, and the casual derision directed at his old-fashioned methods. His attempts to share wisdom were often met with patronizing nods or outright laughter. He constantly wrestled with the desire to retreat further into his secluded life, to simply let the modern world rush past him, oblivious to the precious knowledge it was losing. But an insistent, almost primal urge tugged at him, a deep-seated responsibility to ensure that the mountains, and the wisdom they held, would not be completely forgotten, especially when he saw inexperienced hikers taking increasingly dangerous risks. Guided only by flickering screens and a misplaced sense of invincibility, he knew the mountains could be unforgiving, and the thought of avoidable tragedies gnawed at him. This internal conflict, the tension between his ingrained desire for solitude and a growing sense of duty, was the quiet tremor before the inevitable upheaval. He carried the burden of knowledge no one seemed to want, a silent prophet in a deafened world. The crisp morning air, usually a source of quiet contentment for Elias, was now tinged with a faint, unsettling anxiety. A sleek, black SUV, gleaming aggressively amidst the rustic charm of Gatlinburg's Edge, pulled up precisely at the agreed-upon trailhead. Out stepped a group of 5 hikers, their attire a jarring symphony of neon and high-tech fabrics, their backpacks bristling with the latest gadgets. They were a stark contrast to the subdued greens and browns of the ancient forest. Their excited chatter, loud and boisterous, immediately shattered the serene pre-dawn hush of the mountainside. Leading the pack was Brandon Vance, a man in his late 20s whose chiseled physique spoke of countless hours in a gym, not on a trail. His expensive hiking boots were spotless, his designer sunglasses perched on his head even before the sun had fully risen. Brandon was a burgeoning social media influencer, his online persona built on a carefully curated image of extreme adventure and effortless mastery. He carried himself with an air of supreme confidence, bordering on arrogance, constantly checking his high-end smartwatch and glancing at his phone, already envisioning the perfect Instagram post from Thunder Peak. His voice, naturally loud, echoed with a self-important cheeriness that grated on Elias's ears. He was accustomed to being the center of attention, the alpha in any group, and he clearly expected Elias, the seemingly frail old guide, to fall into line. "All right, old-timer." Brandon boomed, striding confidently towards Elias, who stood patiently by the trailhead, his worn hiking stick planted firmly beside him. Brandon barely spared him a glance, his eyes sweeping over the mountain's vast expanse, as if already claiming it. "Ready to hit the trails. We've got a tight schedule, looking to bag Thunder Peak by noon. Easy. Gotta get that golden hour shot. You know." He flashed a performative, dazzling smile, clearly meant for an imaginary camera. Elias's brow furrowed almost imperceptibly. Noon. That was ambitious. Even for experienced hikers, given the challenging terrain of the upper slopes. For a party that included relatively inexperienced city folk, it bordered on reckless. He simply nodded, a quiet acknowledgement of Brandon's premature enthusiasm. "The mountain sets its own pace, young man," Elias murmured, his voice a low, gravelly rumble, almost lost amidst Brandon's effusive chatter. "It's wise to listen to it." Brandon scoffed, a short, sharp burst of air. "Listen to it, Grandpa. My GPS listens to satellite signals, and my altimeter tells me exactly what the mountain's saying. We've got the latest tech. This isn't your grandpappy's old dirt path. No offense." He patted his sleek, brightly colored backpack. We're all about efficiency and speed out here. No dilly-dallying." He then turned to his companions, winking conspiratorially. "Wouldn't want to get stuck out here with a guide who's slower than a snail. Right." His followers chuckled, some nervously, others with outright amusement, clearly eager to curry favor with the charismatic influencer. The casual, dismissive tone, the open mockery of Elias's slow pace and traditional wisdom, grated on Elias's quiet dignity. As they set off, the initial ascent was gentle, winding through groves of towering oaks and maples. Brandon, true to his word, pushed the pace, practically jogging ahead, constantly checking his watch and urging the others to keep up. Elias, true to his nature, maintained his steady, deliberate gait, his worn leather boots finding purchase on every root and stone with an almost uncanny precision. He didn't rush, but he also didn't fall behind. He moved with the quiet efficiency of a predator, conserving energy, observing every detail. Elias felt a deep, slow burn of irritation at Brandon's arrogance and the group's palpable lack of respect for the raw power of the mountain. He saw their high-tech gear as mere extensions of their urban detachment, insulating them from the very environment they claimed to be conquering. He noted their hurried strides, their obliviousness to the subtle shifts in the forest floor, the changes in the air currents, the distant calls of unseen birds. They were tourists in the truest sense, passing through without truly seeing or understanding. He attempted, gently at first, to impart some of his knowledge. "See how the moss grows thicker on that side of the tree." Elias pointed with his walking stick to a massive hemlock. "That tells you about the prevailing winds and where the moisture gathers. Good to know if you ever lose your way or need shelter." Brandon, who was busy trying to get a selfie with a scenic overlook, barely glanced up. Yeah, moss and trees. Fascinating," he muttered, waving a dismissive hand. "My app tells me the cardinal direction faster than any moss. Old man. Let's keep moving." His followers, eager to please Brandon, echoed his sentiment, stifling yawns or openly checking their phones. Elias's words, born of generations of lived experience, were brushed aside as the irrelevant ramblings of an outdated relic. He felt a familiar pang of resignation, a quiet sadness for the knowledge that was being so casually disregarded. He wrestled with an internal conflict, the professional obligation to simply guide them along the agreed-upon path, allowing them their youthful folly, versus a deeper, almost paternal urge to intervene, to impress upon them the mountain's unpredictable nature. He was a guide, yes, but he also felt a duty to ensure their safety, a responsibility that weighed heavily on his old shoulders. The thought of their ignorance leading them into peril gnawed at him. He saw the reckless energy of Brandon, an echo of countless unprepared hikers he had witnessed over the decades, pushing too hard, too fast, often with disastrous consequences. This was not just about his pride. It was about their very lives. He felt a deep-seated apprehension, a subtle premonition that the mountain, in its quiet wisdom, would not tolerate such disrespect indefinitely. He knew the signs, the subtle whispers that spoke of impending change, of geological shifts that only a lifetime of observation could discern. As they ascended higher, leaving the well-groomed lower trails for the more rugged, rocky terrain leading to Thunder Peak's summit, Elias began to notice subtle, yet unsettling signs. His senses, honed by decades of wilderness living, picked up on nuances invisible to the unobservant eye. He heard the faint, almost imperceptible creak of shifting rock from a distant, unseen ridge, a sound like a giant groaning in its sleep. He saw a tiny shower of pebbles cascade down a steep embankment that usually remained stable. He observed a flock of ravens, usually bold and territorial, suddenly take flight in a panicked, uncharacteristic swirl, their sharp caws echoing with an urgent warning that was far from their typical calls. Even the air felt subtly different, a peculiar stillness before a storm, yet without any immediate atmospheric change. These were not isolated occurrences. They were a connected series of whispers from the mountain itself, signals of geological instability, hints of an impending shift beneath the Earth's ancient skin. Elias's intuition, finely tuned to the pulse of the wilderness, screamed a silent warning. He knew these signs. He had seen them before. He stopped, holding up a hand. "Hold on, folks," he said, his voice unusually grave. "The mountain is uneasy. I hear shifting rock, and the birds are disturbed. There's an unusual stillness in the air." He turned to Brandon, his eyes serious. "I recommend we slow our pace even further, or better yet, we should consider a different route. A lower, more stable one. Thunder Peak can wait for another day if the mountain is not willing." Brandon, who had just finished adjusting his high-tech trekking poles, let out a loud, exasperated sigh. He rolled his eyes at his followers, who exchanged amused glances. "Oh, come on, Gramps," Brandon scoffed, a patronizing smile twisting his lips. "Are you getting cold feet? The mountain is uneasy. That's a new one. My weather app says clear skies, and my topo map shows this trail is perfectly safe. Probably just a squirrel knocking some pebbles around." He chuckled, trying to lighten the mood with a dismissive joke. "Don't tell me you're getting too old for this." Elias, one of Brandon's followers, a young woman named Chloe, giggled. "Yeah, Elias, we came all this way for Thunder Peak. Don't be such a buzzkill." Elias felt a surge of frustration, but he kept his voice steady. "The mountain has its own language, young man, and it speaks in ways a screen cannot capture. These signs, they are not to be ignored. There's a risk of a rockslide up ahead. I feel it in the earth." Brandon threw his hands up in exasperation. "A rockslide? Seriously, look, Elias, we hired you to guide us up the mountain, not to give us a geology lecture based on feelings and disturbed birds. We're on a schedule. We're going to stick to the main trail. It's the most direct route, and it's perfectly safe. We've come too far to turn back because of an old man's superstitions." He made a show of checking his GPS. "The trail goes this way, clear as day. Let's keep moving. People." He shot a challenging glare at Elias, a clear assertion of his dominance. Elias looked at the group, at their dismissive faces, their unwavering trust in Brandon's technology over his seasoned wisdom. He felt a profound sense of helplessness. He knew the danger. He knew what these subtle signs portended. But they wouldn't listen. To abandon them now, to leave them to Brandon's reckless leadership, felt unthinkable. His conscience, his deep sense of responsibility as a guide, would not allow it. He had a duty, even if his warnings were scorned. With a heavy heart, Elias turned and continued up the main trail, his slow, deliberate pace now imbued with a quiet sense of foreboding. He knew, with a chilling certainty, that this journey had fundamentally changed. The mountain, disrespected and unheeded, would eventually respond. He was no longer just a guide leading a hike. He was a silent guardian walking into an unfolding disaster, powerless to prevent it. This deeply unsettling premonition, coupled with his inability to turn back, marked his point of no return. The illusion of a simple hike had been shattered. He was now on a perilous course, tethered to a group determined to ignore the very warnings that could save them. His solitary life was irrevocably entangled with their fate, and the true test of his wisdom and their survival lay just ahead. The air grew thinner as the hiking party ascended, and the path, once a clear, well-trodden route, became a treacherous maze of loose scree and exposed roots. The dense canopy of trees began to thin, revealing jagged ancient rock faces that loomed overhead, their surfaces scarred by millennia of wind and water. The subtle signs Elias had perceived earlier now felt more insistent. A low thrum beneath his worn boots, a tension in the very fabric of the mountain. He noted the increased frequency of small rockfalls, mere pebbles at first, then larger stones, clattering down the slopes, harmlessly bouncing off the main trail, but hinting at deeper instability. Brandon Vance, oblivious to Elias's mounting unease, continued to push the pace, his enthusiasm undimmed by the increasingly challenging terrain. He prided himself on his physical prowess, his ability to conquer challenges, and his digital tools, like his advanced GPS watch and a topographical map app on his smartphone, which he trusted implicitly. Almost at the first overlook, "Guys," he shouted, his voice echoing, a vibrant, almost manic energy radiating from him. "My watch says we're way ahead of schedule. Take that, old man pace." He glanced back at Elias, a smirk playing on his lips, a clear challenge. Elias simply maintained his steady, measured climb, his eyes constantly scanning the terrain, his ears attuned to every shift in the wind, every rustle in the undergrowth. He felt the cold impatience emanating from Brandon like a palpable wave. He knew the dangers of speed in these mountains. A single misstep could lead to a twisted ankle, a broken bone, or worse. For Elias, every step was a deliberate conversation with the earth, a test of its stability, a dialogue of respect and caution. He saw Brandon's reckless haste as a direct insult to the mountain's ancient power. Suddenly, Brandon, impatient with Elias's snail's pace and eager to prove his superior judgment, stopped abruptly. He peered at his phone, his brow furrowed in concentration. "Hold on a sec, guys," he announced, gesturing excitedly towards a narrow, overgrown gully that veered sharply off the main trail. "My app shows a shortcut here, cuts off at least half a mile, probably more. We can bypass that long switchback up ahead. Smart. Right. Why waste time on the scenic route?" He flashed a triumphant grin at his followers, already envisioning the bragging rights and the impressive time savings he'd post online. "Brandon, wait." Elias's voice, sharp with urgency, cut through the air. "That's not a recognized trail. It looks like a drainage channel. It could be unstable, especially after the rains last week. There could be loose rock, sinkholes. It's far too risky." Elias felt a cold dread in his stomach. He recognized the gully. It was marked on his ancestral map as a place to avoid, a treacherous path prone to hidden hazards, a death trap in certain conditions. It was one of the slow paths for a reason, slow to traverse due to its danger, not its leisurely nature. Brandon merely scoffed, waving Elias off dismissively. "Risky, Grandpa. You worry too much. This is clearly a path. My app identifies it as a game trail. Perfectly traversable. It's just steep. See, it's even highlighted as a less traveled route by some adventurous hikers online. Probably only old guides like you wouldn't know about it." He turned to the other hikers, his eyes gleaming with self-importance. "Who's with me? Quickest way to the top. Let's show the old man how it's done." Two of his followers, a young couple named Chad and Brittany, hesitated for a moment, glancing nervously at Elias. But the allure of a shortcut, and the desire to stay in Brandon's good graces, quickly won out. "Yeah, let's do it." "Brandon." Chad enthused, eager for the excitement. "Faster is better." "No, you mustn't," Elias pleaded, his voice tinged with desperation. He felt a profound personal responsibility for their safety, even if they refused to heed his warnings. He knew, with an agonizing certainty, what lay in that gully. This wasn't merely a suggestion. It was a desperate plea for their lives. He had to intervene, even if it meant revealing a fraction of his secret knowledge. But Brandon was already pushing into the dense undergrowth, forging his own path. "Come on, Elias. Don't be such a wet blanket if you're too slow. We'll just meet you at the top." His laughter, sharp and arrogant, echoed as he disappeared into the dense foliage, followed by Chad and Brittany. The other two hikers in the group, a quiet, observant woman named Mia Chen and a somewhat nervous man named Kevin, looked at Elias, then at the disappearing figures, a flicker of uncertainty in their eyes. Mia, a freelance nature photographer who had hired Elias specifically for his reputation as a knowledgeable local guide, had been quietly observing Elias's reactions, finding his quiet wisdom more compelling than Brandon's bluster. She was the helper, the one who would recognize Elias's true light. Elias had no choice. He couldn't let them go into that trap alone. His duty as a guide, his ingrained sense of stewardship for the mountain and its visitors, compelled him. He had to follow, to bring Brandon back to safety. With a sigh of profound resignation, he took a different route, a parallel, fainter, slow path that was technically more challenging but far safer, designed to allow him to move quickly and quietly through the dense terrain, anticipating where Brandon would emerge. This forced him to tap into his most secret knowledge, the ancient wisdom encoded in his ancestral map. He moved with a speed that belied his age, his movements fluid and silent as a forest spirit, effortlessly navigating unseen obstacles. He wasn't overtly showcasing his talent, but using it out of sheer, desperate necessity. Within minutes, Elias heard it, Brandon's furious shouts, followed by a frustrated yell from Chad. "What the heck? Brandon, this is a dead end, and it's all loose rock." Elias emerged from the dense undergrowth, his face grim, his presence seemingly appearing out of nowhere. Brandon, tangled in thorny vines, his designer hiking jacket snagged, looked up, his face a mixture of anger and embarrassment. He had reached a sheer rock face, a dead end with no discernible path forward, and the ground beneath his feet was indeed dangerously loose. His GPS, showing a solid green line, was utterly useless against the unforgiving reality of the rock. "I told you," Elias said, his voice devoid of triumph, only a deep weariness. "This gully is a trick. The mountain does not give up its secrets easily to those who do not respect its ways." He pointed to a barely visible cluster of moss-covered stones. "There, a small fissure, hidden from casual sight. It will lead back to the main trail, but you must be careful, one by one, and slowly." He didn't gloat. He simply offered the solution, his expertise revealed by necessity. Miachin, who had followed Elias, her camera already out, watched the entire scene unfold with a mixture of relief and dawning awe. She had seen Elias's fluid, almost superhuman movement through the dense forest, and now she witnessed his quiet, unerring knowledge of the treacherous terrain. Her eyes widened as she compared his calm certainty to Brandon's flustered frustration. She captured several candid shots of Elias pointing out the hidden path, his weathered finger against the ancient rock. She instinctively understood that she was witnessing something extraordinary, a wisdom far beyond what any digital device could offer. She was the helper, the quiet observer who would validate Elias's true worth. Brandon, though visibly shaken and embarrassed, refused to acknowledge Elias's superior knowledge. He felt humiliated, his carefully constructed image of outdoor mastery shattered by an old man's intuition. All right, fine," he snapped, his voice sharp with thinly veiled fury. "So you were right this one time, old-timer. Beginner's luck, probably. Or maybe you've got some secret map you're holding out on us. Huh." He shot a suspicious, angry glance at Elias, his eyes burning with resentment. His bruised ego demanded a scapegoat. He was the antagonist type B, fueled by arrogance and prejudice, now intensified by public embarrassment. He scrambled through the fissure Elias indicated, his movements clumsy, his previous bravado replaced by a surly resentment. Once back on the main trail, he turned on Elias, his voice laced with venom. "You know what? Elias, this isn't professional. You're holding out on us, aren't you? Keeping these secret paths to yourself. Probably just trying to make us rely on you, so you can charge more for your ancient wisdom." He was already twisting the narrative, trying to regain control. "And honestly, your pace is still ridiculous. We've wasted precious time because of your super cautious feelings and your supposed hidden paths. I'm going to make sure everyone knows what kind of guide you are." Expect a scathing review online. "Elias, your days of traditional guiding are over." He turned to his followers, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper, but loud enough for Elias to hear. "This guy's a joke. I'm going to tank his ratings." The threat hung in the air, a poisonous dart aimed at Elias's quiet reputation. Brandon's accusation of Elias holding back information was a direct attack on his integrity, a desperate attempt to frame Elias's ancient knowledge as manipulative rather than protective. This confrontation, fueled by Brandon's profound embarrassment and deep-seated arrogance, solidified the antagonistic dynamic. Elias had proven his skill, but instead of gratitude, he received hostility and a threat to his livelihood. The mountain, and Elias's connection to it, had saved Brandon, but Brandon's pride ensured the conflict would escalate. Elias felt the familiar sting of modern disdain for ancient wisdom, but this time, it was accompanied by a chilling sense of foreboding. The mountain's whispers had warned him of instability, and Brandon's actions had confirmed it. The real danger wasn't just the terrain, it was the human element, the hubris that refused to learn. The air grew heavy, not just with the impending storm that Elias felt in his bones, but with the suffocating weight of Brandon Vance's simmering resentment. After the humiliating incident in the gully, Brandon's mockery intensified, his words sharper, laced with a venomous edge. He moved ahead of the group whenever he could, deliberately ignoring Elias's slower, more cautious pace, forcing the others to choose between the frantic energy of their self-proclaimed leader and the quiet, deliberate wisdom of their hired guide. The atmosphere within the group fractured, a subtle tension settling between those who blindly followed Brandon's bravado and those, like Mia Chen and Kevin, who now eyed Elias with a nascent, hesitant respect. They continued their ascent, the path growing steeper, the rocky outcrops more frequent. The main trail, usually a well-defined ribbon of earth and stone, began to feel less like a safe thoroughfare and more like a precarious ledge clinging to the mountainside. Overhead, the sky, which Brandon's app had promised would remain clear, began to darken with an alarming rapidity. Wisps of dark, bruised clouds, previously unseen, now swirled around Thunder Peak's summit, shrouding its rugged contours in an ominous gloom. A cold wind began to whip through the sparse trees, carrying with it the undeniable scent of rain, a metallic tang that Elias recognized instantly. "We need to turn back, or find immediate shelter," Elias stated, his voice calm but firm, cutting through Brandon's cheerful boasts about their speed. "The weather is turning fast. A storm of this intensity, at this altitude, can be deadly." He pointed towards the rapidly darkening sky, then to a small, barely discernible overhang of rock further down the trail. "There's a small cave there. Not ideal, but it offers some protection." Brandon scoffed, pulling out his smartphone and tapping at its screen. "My radar says light rain. Old man, nothing to worry about. Besides, we're almost at the upper ridge, just a few more minutes, and we'll be at the scenic overlook. Perfect for a dramatic storm shot, actually." He grinned, already framing the image in his mind. "We're pushing through. No turning back now. This is where the real adventure begins. Right, guys?" He looked at his followers, seeking their validation. Chad and Brittany, though looking a little nervous, nodded enthusiastically. Kevin shifted uncomfortably, glancing at Elias, but said nothing. Elias felt a cold dread settle in his stomach. Their blind faith in technology, their dismissive arrogance towards the mountain's warnings, was a recipe for disaster. He knew the difference between a passing shower and a genuine mountain storm. He knew how quickly a seemingly harmless drizzle could turn into a torrential downpour, capable of triggering flash floods and, more ominously, rockslides on these already unstable slopes. The air tasted of static, a subtle vibration underfoot, signs that only decades of living intimately with the mountains could decipher. This wasn't just a forecast, it was a premonition. They pressed on, Brandon's relentless pace pushing them higher. The first drops of rain began to fall, fat and cold, quickly turning into a steady downpour. The wind picked up, howling through the exposed crags, carrying with it the unsettling murmur of the mountain. Visibility rapidly decreased as a thick, swirling mist descended, obscuring the path ahead and behind. Each step became more treacherous, the wet rock surfaces slick and unforgiving. Suddenly, without warning, a deep, guttural rumble tore through the air, vibrating through the ground beneath their feet. It was a sound Elias knew intimately, a sound that struck primal fear into the heart of any mountaineer, the groaning roar of shifting earth. It started as a distant echo, then rapidly intensified, growing into a deafening crescendo. "Rockslide!" Elias bellowed, his voice, usually soft, now a powerful, urgent roar that cut through the wind and rain. "Get down, shelter!" He instinctively lunged towards Mia Chen and Kevin, pushing them roughly towards the meager protection of a small, indented rock face. A terrifying cascade of sound followed, the splintering of trees, the tearing of earth, and the thunderous roar of thousands of tons of rock tearing loose from the mountainside. The very air filled with dust, debris, and the terrifying shriek of grinding stone. A wall of mud and rock, a monstrous, unstoppable force, surged down the slope, swallowing the main trail completely. It was over in a matter of seconds, leaving behind an eerie, ringing silence broken only by the drumming of rain and the ragged gasps of the hikers. When the dust began to settle, the horrifying reality became clear. The main trail, the very path they had been on, was now completely obliterated. A massive, impassable wall of jagged boulders, splintered timber, and churned earth stretched as far as the eye could see, both up and down the mountain. They were cut off, trapped. The path back to civilization was gone, swallowed by the mountain's wrath, and the path forward to Thunder Peak, if it still existed, was equally impassable through the fresh devastation. The small group huddled together, soaked to the bone, their faces pale with shock and terror. Their high-tech gear, their waterproof jackets and GPS devices, suddenly felt utterly useless. Brandon, who had been scrambling ahead, now stood frozen, his eyes wide with a stunned disbelief, his usual bravado completely evaporated. Chad and Brittany huddled together, whimpering softly. Kevin stared blankly at the massive rockfall, his jaw slack. Their situation was dire. The rain intensified, turning into a torrential downpour that made the ground slick and visibility almost zero. The temperature plummeted, a chilling wind whistling through their thin, expensive layers. They were high up the mountain, miles from any recognized shelter or rescue point. Their supply of water and snacks was rapidly dwindling, intended only for a day hike, not a prolonged survival situation. Panic, cold and sharp, began to set in. Brandon, the self-proclaimed leader, was the first to react, pulling out his satellite phone. He tapped frantically at the screen. No signal. No signal anywhere, he cried, his voice laced with a desperate edge. He then fumbled with his GPS device. It's showing us off the map. The trail's gone. There's no data for this new terrain. His face contorted in frustrated rage. His technology, his crutch, had utterly failed him. The very tools he had mocked Elias for dismissing were now nothing but expensive paperweights. "What do we do?" Chloe whimpered, her voice trembling. "We're stuck. No one knows we're here." Fear spread rapidly through the group, dissolving their previous camaraderie. Accusations began to fly. "This is your fault," Brandon Chad snapped, his face contorted with anger. "You rushed us. You ignored the old man." Brittany began to sob uncontrollably. Elias stood apart, a solitary, calm figure amidst the rising tide of hysteria. His gaze swept over the scene, assessing the damage, measuring the new contours of the land. He was acutely aware of the group's complete and utter solitude. They were alone, truly alone, in the vast, unforgiving wilderness. No cell towers, no emergency services, no quick rescue. They were entirely dependent on themselves and on the knowledge of one man they had scorned. The full weight of their predicament, and his unique position as their only hope, settled heavily upon him. He felt the cold touch of the rising night air, the biting wind, and the relentless drumming of the rain. The thought of them spending a night exposed, unprepared, was a chilling one. The rain continued to lash down, turning the ground to a slick, treacherous mud. The wind howled, snatching at their clothes, chilling them to the bone. Night was falling fast, the last vestiges of twilight fading into an inky blackness that swallowed the mountains whole. They were in a race against time, not just against the elements, but against their own dwindling resources and mounting despair. The situation was profoundly, existentially dangerous. Their very survival hinged on finding a way out, and Elias was the only one with the knowledge that could possibly guide them through this impossible labyrinth. The pressure was immense, a tangible force pressing down on his old shoulders. Every tick of the mental clock, every drop of rain, every gust of wind, amplified the desperate urgency of their predicament. The monstrous roar of the rockslide had subsided, replaced by the relentless drumming of rain and the chilling wail of the wind. The air, thick with the scent of pulverized rock and wet earth, pressed down on the stranded hikers, amplifying their terror. They were suspended in a void of cold and fear, their high-tech gear rendered useless, their self-proclaimed leader, Brandon Vance, reduced to a trembling, impotent figure. The vast, unforgiving mountain, shrouded in a rapidly descending shroud of night and mist, became their silent, indifferent jailer. Panic. A raw, primal beast, clawed at the group. Chloe whimpered, burying her face in Chad's shoulder, her body shaking uncontrollably. Brittany, openly sobbing, mumbled incoherent pleas to go home. Kevin stared at the impenetrable wall of rock, his eyes wide with a desperate, unfocused dread. Brandon, meanwhile, was a spectacle of frustrated rage. He repeatedly slammed his useless satellite phone against his thigh, as if violence could coax a signal from the indifferent wilderness. This is insane. My GPS is totally blank. It's like we're not even on a map anymore. We're going to freeze out here. We're going to starve his voice, once so full of arrogant confidence, now cracked with the thin edge of hysteria. He was utterly broken, his carefully constructed persona of mastery crumbling in the face of true, untamed nature. His expensive equipment, designed for speed and convenience, was now just dead weight, a mocking testament to his misplaced faith in technology over true understanding. All eyes, though, eventually turned to Elias Thorne. He stood apart from the huddle, a lone sentinel against the encroaching darkness, his weathered face calm despite the chaos. He wasn't yelling, wasn't panicking, wasn't frantically searching for a signal. He was simply observing. He listened to the rain, felt the subtle vibrations in the ground beneath his old boots, breathed in the shifting scents carried on the wind. He was assessing, calculating, his mind working with a quiet, ancient efficiency. He was their only hope, and everyone instinctively knew it. Even Brandon, who now looked at him with a desperate, grudging deference. "There's no way through this," Brandon finally croaked, his voice hoarse, gesturing vaguely at the towering wall of debris. "We're trapped. We have to wait for rescue." He sank to his knees, utterly defeated, his face buried in his hands. The sense of utter failure radiating from him was palpable. He had believed himself invincible, and the mountain had, in one swift, terrifying act, proven him profoundly wrong. He was physically and mentally spent, his arrogance having been stripped away, leaving behind only raw fear. It was in this moment of collective despair, this nadir of human desperation, that Elias moved. He reached into his worn leather pouch, the one he always kept securely attached to his belt, and slowly, deliberately, pulled out the ancient, hand-drawn map. Its deer-hide surface, darkened and supple with centuries of handling, seemed to absorb the dim light, its intricate lines and symbols almost glowing faintly. He spread it carefully on a relatively flat rock, shielding it from the driving rain with his body. The map was unlike anything any of them had ever seen, a stark contrast to Brandon's sleek, digital screens. It wasn't a grid of coordinates, but a fluid, organic depiction of the mountain's hidden arteries, its secret veins and capillaries. Mia Chen, the quiet photographer who had observed Elias with nascent respect, leaned closer, her eyes widening as she recognized the peculiar, intricate symbols. She instinctively understood that this was something precious, something ancient. Kevin, peering over her shoulder, saw the faint, almost invisible lines that snaked through areas marked with symbols representing hidden springs and ancient game trails. "This," Elias stated, his voice a calm, steady counterpoint to the raging storm, "is the mountain's memory. It shows us the slow path. The only path. Now." He ran a gnarled finger along a faint, winding line that peeled off from where the main trail had been, disappearing into a dense thicket of spruce. "This is an old game trail, used by the deer for generations. It runs parallel to the main ridge, far below the unstable rock. It is treacherous in places, narrow, and requires patience. But it is stable, and it will take us down, away from the immediate danger, to a lower stream bed that eventually leads out of the wilderness." The moment was thick with a breathless tension. All eyes were riveted on the ancient map, then on Elias's face. He began to describe the path, not with grand pronouncements, but with the meticulous detail of someone who knew every rock, every root, every whisper of the wind along its length. "We must move slowly," he explained, his voice measured. "One step at a time. The ground will be slick. There's a hidden spring about a mile in, a good place to refill water. Then, a narrow ledge, windswept, but with good handholds if you know where to place your feet." He pointed to a specific, almost imperceptible symbol on the map. "There's a small, ancient cairn there, built by my ancestors. It marks the precise spot where the path narrows significantly. You must stay close to the rock face." He didn't rush, didn't panic. Each word was carefully chosen, each gesture precise, demonstrating a profound, almost terrifying intimacy with the terrain. He described the subtle shifts in elevation, the types of trees that would indicate a change in soil stability, even the particular scent of certain mosses that would confirm their location. It was a symphony of knowledge, a lifetime of observation distilled into a calm, guiding voice. He spoke of the mountain as if it were an old friend, a living entity whose moods he understood implicitly. Brandon, who had lifted his head, his face still streaked with mud and tears, stared at the map, then at Elias. His initial reaction was a flicker of his old arrogance. "That's not on any modern map. How can you be sure it's probably just a deer path? You'll get us lost." But even as he spoke, his voice lacked conviction. He watched Elias's finger trace a curve on the map. Then his eyes darted to the corresponding feature in the swirling mist outside. A peculiar split oak tree that Elias had just described, now eerily visible through a momentary break in the fog. A chill of dawning realization, cold and profound, ran down Brandon's spine. Elias had described something he had seen with his own eyes earlier on the hike. A detail so minute, so specific, that only someone with an intimate knowledge of the mountain could possibly know it. His doubt, his ingrained skepticism of anything not digital, began to crack. "The main trail is gone," Elias stated, his gaze meeting Brandon's, devoid of judgment. "This is the way, the slow way." The other hikers, witnessing Brandon's stunned silence, began to listen more intently. Chloe and Brittany, huddled together, leaned forward, their fear giving way to a desperate, fragile hope. Kevin, ever the quiet observer, watched Elias's hands as he pointed out another unique rock formation on the map, then quickly scanned the immediate surroundings, finding a faint outline of it in the gloom. The utter, terrifying accuracy of Elias's knowledge, passed down through generations, was now undeniable. As Elias continued to meticulously explain the route, their expressions shifted. The initial skepticism etched on their faces began to soften. replaced by wide-eyed astonishment. They saw not a quaint old man, but a living compass, a walking library of mountain lore. Brandon, who had once openly mocked Elias's pace and his feelings, now looked at him with a mixture of profound shock and a burgeoning, unfamiliar respect. He recognized the stark difference between his own shallow, tech-dependent knowledge and Elias's deep embodied wisdom. He saw in that moment the true, terrifying extent of his own arrogance and the invaluable, almost sacred nature of Elias's connection to the mountain. His past derision now felt like a crushing weight of shame. When Elias finally finished his detailed explanation, a silence fell, but this time it was one of awe, not despair. Then, softly at first, Mia Chen stepped forward. "Elias," she said, her voice filled with a reverence she couldn't hide. "You lead. We'll follow. Whatever you say." Her trust was absolute, immediate. Kevin nodded vigorously, his eyes shining with newfound admiration. Even Chad and Brittany, their faces still tear-streaked, offered hesitant, grateful nods. Brandon, still visibly shaken, slowly pushed himself to his feet. He looked at the shattered trail, then at Elias's calm, weathered face, then back at the ancient map, its lines now seeming to pulse with life and destiny. He knew, with an undeniable certainty, that his life, and the lives of everyone in the group, rested solely in the hands of the man he had ridiculed. The slow path he had scorned was now their only lifeline. The initial hoots of laughter, the dismissive gestures, the arrogant boasts, all of it faded, replaced by an overwhelming sense of humility and a deep, agonizing shame. As Elias turned, gathering his simple gear, the group followed, their faith in him absolute. Their eyes, once filled with doubt and derision, now shone with a desperate, burgeoning trust, then transformed into utter, profound admiration. They had witnessed not just a guide, but a true master, and their survival depended entirely on his ancient, profound wisdom. The descent from the perilous heights of Thunder Peak was a crucible that forged a new understanding within the hearts of the stranded hikers. Guided by Elias Thorne, they moved not with haste, but with a deliberate, almost reverent slowness, each step a testament to the old guide's unerring knowledge. Elias, despite his age, navigated the treacherous, mud-slicked paths with an uncanny agility, his gnarled hands finding purchase on invisible footholds, his eyes piercing the gloom of the forest with an almost preternatural vision. He moved like the mountain itself, ancient and unyielding, attuned to every shift in the earth, every whisper of the wind. He didn't speak much, but when he did, his words were precise, vital. Left foot here, on the moss-covered rock. It's stable. Right hand on that root. Mind the loose soil. His instructions were simple, yet carried the weight of survival. The slow path, initially mocked for its perceived inefficiency, became their lifeline. It wound through dense thickets, along narrow ledges where a single misstep would be fatal, and across icy, roaring streams. It was a path that demanded absolute focus, complete trust, and a willingness to surrender to the wisdom of the one who truly knew the land. Brandon Vance, once the picture of arrogant self-assurance, was now a pale, humbled shadow of his former self. His expensive, high-tech gear, designed for conquering peaks, felt like a mockery against the raw, unyielding power of the wilderness. He stumbled often, his muscles screaming from the exertion and the cold, but each time, Elias, or Mia Chen, would offer a steadying hand, a quiet word of encouragement. Brandon found himself relying on the very old man he had so vehemently ridiculed, his life literally in the older man's hands. The hours crawled by, each minute an eternity of physical and mental strain, as they painstakingly navigated the labyrinthine, hidden trails. The cold, the hunger, and the fear gnawed at them. But Elias's calm, unwavering presence was an anchor in the storm. Finally, after what felt like an endless night, they emerged from the tree line onto a narrow, seldom used logging road, miles from where they had started, but unmistakably civilization. The first faint rays of dawn painted the eastern sky with hues of rose and violet, illuminating their mud-splattered faces, their exhausted but alive forms. They were safe. The collective relief was a palpable wave, overwhelming and profound. Chloe and Brittany sank to the ground, sobbing with sheer exhaustion and gratitude. Kevin simply stared at Elias, his eyes wide with a reverence he couldn't articulate. But it was Brandon who underwent the most significant transformation. He stood before Elias, his head bowed, his expensive hiking jacket torn, his face streaked with dirt and shame. His arrogance, once an impenetrable shield, had been utterly shattered by the mountain's brutal honesty and Elias's quiet strength. Elias. Brandon's voice was hoarse, barely a whisper, devoid of its usual bluster. He looked up, his eyes meeting the old guide's, filled with an raw, unvarnished remorse. I don't know what to say. I was an arrogant fool. I mocked you. I dismissed your wisdom. I put all of us in danger with my pride and my foolish faith in gadgets. He clenched his fists, tears welling in his eyes. You saved our lives, and I was despicable. I am so sorry. His apology was heartfelt, genuine, and utterly stripped of any performative pretense. He didn't just regret his actions. He was genuinely ashamed of the person he had been. He, the antagonist type B, had truly recognized his profound error. Elias simply looked at him, his gaze soft but penetrating. He saw not the arrogant influencer, but a young man humbled by the raw power of nature, stripped bare of his illusions. The mountain has a way of teaching lessons. Young man, Elias said, his voice a gentle rumble. Sometimes it takes a heavy hand for us to truly learn. He paused, then offered a small though rare smile. But you listened. Eventually, that is what matters. He extended a hand, not in an accusatory gesture, but in one of quiet understanding. Brandon took it, a silent pact passing between them. The hikers were eventually met by park rangers, alerted by a search and rescue team that had finally managed to gain a signal from a distant ridge. News of the miraculous escape and of Elias Thorne's heroic guidance through a previously unknown secret path quickly spread. The media, initially eager to sensationalize the rockslide, now focused on Elias, portraying him not as an eccentric old man, but as a living legend, a true master of the mountains. His quiet, traditional ways were no longer mocked. They were celebrated as invaluable wisdom. The demand for Elias's guidance skyrocketed, but he did not seek fame or fortune. Instead, he found a new, profound purpose. He was approached by several academic institutions and conservation organizations, not for commercial tours, but for his expertise. The National Park Service invited him to become a consultant, to help them map and understand the more remote, fragile sections of the Smoky Mountains, particularly those areas prone to geological instability. Universities offered him honorary degrees and speaking engagements, eager for him to share his unique blend of indigenous knowledge and lived experience. More importantly, he had the opportunity to teach, to mentor, to pass on the knowledge he cherished. He led workshops on sustainable hiking practices, on reading the land, on the wisdom of the slow path, drawing in eager students and seasoned environmentalists alike. This was the most meaningful reward, the chance to impart his profound respect for nature to those who truly wished to learn. His previous quiet, solitary life was now enriched by purpose and genuine connection. Weeks after their harrowing ordeal, Brandon Vance, completely changed, returned to Elias's humble cabin. He arrived not in his flashy SUV, but on foot, carrying a simple backpack and a hand-carved walking stick, clearly one he had made himself. He was no longer the meticulously groomed influencer. His hair was longer, his face leaner, his eyes holding a new, quiet humility. He knocked tentatively on the cabin door. Elias, sitting by the fire, looked up, a knowing smile playing on his lips. "Come in, young man," he invited. Brandon entered. taking a seat on a worn stool. "Elias," he began, his voice earnest and devoid of any artifice. I came to thank you again, and to ask if you would teach me. Really teach me. Not just how to hike, but how to listen to the mountain. How to be like you." He looked Elias in the eye, his gaze steady. "I left the social media world. It feels hollow. I want to understand this mountain. Truly understand it." Elias nodded, his eyes twinkling with ancient wisdom. "The mountain doesn't care how fast you climb. Young man," he said, his voice a soft rumble. "It only cares how much you respect it. And respect comes from understanding. And understanding comes from listening, not just with your ears, but with your heart." He gestured towards the simple, rustic landscape outside his window. "There are many paths through these mountains. Some are fast, some are difficult, and some are slow, but every path has a lesson. And sometimes, the slowest path is the truest way home." Brandon listened, rapt. He knew now that Elias's slow path wasn't about physical speed, but about a deliberate, mindful engagement with the world, a deep connection to the ancient rhythms of nature. He had learned that true mastery came not from conquering, but from understanding and respecting. Their conversation flowed easily, a meeting of two souls from different worlds, now united by a shared, profound experience and a mutual respect. The mentor and the student, the ancient wisdom and the humbled youth, had found their new calm, their new purpose, together. 5 years later, the Great Smoky Mountains, ancient and timeless, still held their secrets. But now, a subtle shift had occurred within their human visitors. The roaring crowds of quick-fix tourists in Gatlinburg remained, yet a growing number of trekkers sought a deeper connection, a more profound understanding of the wilderness. This transformation was, in no small part, due to Elias Thorne, now universally known and revered as Thorne of the Mountains. He was no longer a misunderstood recluse. He had become a living legend, an iconic embodiment of indigenous wisdom and harmonious coexistence with nature. His humble, hand-hewn cabin, once a solitary dwelling, had organically evolved into an unofficial, vibrant learning hub for those genuinely seeking authentic knowledge of the wild. It was a place where modern hubris was shed at the doorstep, replaced by a quiet reverence for the land. Thorne, his silver beard now even longer and more distinguished, his eyes holding the profound peace of one deeply aligned with the earth, ran a unique, highly sought-after mentorship program. He didn't advertise. His reputation, built on integrity and survival, spread by word of mouth among serious outdoor enthusiasts, environmental scientists, and those simply searching for a more meaningful engagement with nature. Under his gentle but firm guidance, students learned far more than just survival skills. They learned the intricate language of the forest, how to identify edible plants by their subtle scent, how to track elusive wildlife by the faintest disturbance of moss, how to predict weather patterns by the behavior of insects and the quality of the light. They learned the art of silent movement, of blending into the landscape, of becoming observers rather than conquerors. Most profoundly, Elias taught them the philosophy of the slow path, not just a physical pace, but a deliberate, mindful way of living, observing, and respecting the interconnectedness of all things. His teachings emphasized humility, patience, and the understanding that true strength came not from dominance over nature, but from harmony with it. The most dedicated and transformed of Elias's disciples was, without a doubt, Brandon Vance. The once arrogant social media influencer was now a man utterly changed, a testament to the mountain's profound, if harsh, lessons. He had completely abandoned his former career, exchanging the fleeting validation of likes and views for the enduring satisfaction of meaningful work. His chiseled physique, once a display of vanity, was now honed by genuine physical exertion and purpose, his hands calloused from trail maintenance and fieldwork. Brandon had dedicated his life to wilderness conservation and to championing Elias's philosophy of the slow path. he became a passionate advocate, not just for the preservation of the physical wilderness, but for the invaluable, often overlooked, indigenous knowledge that Elias represented. Using the considerable influence he had amassed in his previous life, Brandon established the Ancient Paths Initiative, a non-profit organization dedicated to raising funds and awareness for the protection of old-growth forests and the promotion of traditional ecological knowledge. He spearheaded campaigns to buy and protect untouched tracts of wilderness from commercial logging, working tirelessly with local communities and indigenous groups. He organized educational retreats in the mountains, bringing diverse groups together to learn directly from Elias and other elders, fostering cross-cultural understanding and a shared respect for the land. His once flourishing social media channels, now rebranded and repurposed, became powerful platforms for environmental education and ethical outdoor recreation, reaching a vast audience with messages of conservation and mindfulness, a stark contrast to his former content. Recognizing the fragility of knowledge passed down orally, Brandon also undertook a monumental project to help Elias and other elders digitize a portion of their ancestral wisdom. With Elias's permission and careful oversight, Brandon created a secure, searchable digital library of traditional trails, rare plant knowledge, and ancient weather forecasting techniques. It was a painstaking process, meticulously documenting Elias's hand-drawn map and his vast oral history, translating centuries of intimate observation into a format that could be preserved and shared responsibly with future generations of scholars and conservationists. This ensured that Elias's profound understanding, once at risk of being lost to time, would be safeguarded and accessible, a bridge between ancient wisdom and modern technology. One crisp, clear autumn morning, as the first golden rays of dawn began to kiss the rugged peaks of the Smoky Mountains, Elias and Brandon sat together on a high outcrop overlooking a vast, mist-shrouded valley. The air was cool and clean, carrying the faint scent of wood smoke from Elias's distant cabin. Below them, the sprawling expanse of forest unfolded like a living tapestry, its greens and browns highlighted by the nascent light. Elias, his gaze sweeping across the familiar landscape, pointed with his gnarled walking stick towards a barely discernible trace on the mountainside below. It was a thin, almost invisible line, a faint indentation winding its way through the dense undergrowth, hidden from the casual eye. It was one of the slow paths, a route known only to a precious few, a passage that would never appear on any conventional map. Brandon followed his gaze, his eyes narrowing slightly as he tried to discern the faint trail. After a moment, a slow, understanding smile spread across his face. He nodded, a quiet affirmation. He didn't need Elias to explain its significance, didn't need a GPS coordinate to confirm its existence. He simply saw it. He had learned not just to look, but to truly perceive, to read the subtle language of the land. His eyes, once quick to dismiss what his technology couldn't quantify, now held the quiet, discerning gaze of a true mountain man. "You see it now, son," Elias murmured, his voice soft, filled with a deep, quiet satisfaction. It wasn't a question, but an acknowledgement. "I do, Elias," Brandon replied, his voice equally soft, respectful. "I see the path, and I know why it's the only way." He understood that the slow path wasn't about physical speed, but about patience, respect, and a profound attunement to the natural world. It was about listening to the mountain's whispers, honoring its ancient wisdom, and moving through life with deliberate purpose rather than hurried arrogance. The sun climbed higher, painting the peaks in fiery hues, slowly burning off the lingering mist. It illuminated the two figures on the mountain, the old guide and his transformed protege, side by side, united by a shared purpose and a deep, unspoken bond. It was an image of peaceful succession, of ancient wisdom gracefully passed to a new generation, a symbol of harmony between humanity and nature, forged in hardship and nurtured through profound respect. The mountains, vast and eternal, watched over them, a silent testament to the enduring power of lessons learned the slow way. If this story stirred your heart, if it reminds you that courage can alter destinies, and that light always finds a path even in the deepest darkness. Please leave a comment. Share this story with those who need inspiration. Like, subscribe, and hit the bell to never miss our upcoming stories.